You think soul food was just Sunday fried chicken? Think again. During the Harlem Renaissance, Black families transformed their Sunday tables into powerful celebrations of heritage, creativity, and survival. Let's dig into 30 lost soul food recipes that Harlem families ate every Sunday. Stewed oxtails with butter beans represented Sunday luxury in Harlem apartments where families gathered after church to share meals that simmered all morning long. The oxtails were browned until deeply caramelized, then braised for hours with onions, garlic, tomatoes, and thyme until meat surrendered from the bone completely. Butter beans were added in the final hour, absorbing the rich gravy until they turned creamy and almost velvety. The dish filled small kitchens with aromas that drifted into hallways, announcing celebration to everyone nearby. For families who had migrated north during the Great Migration, oxtails were affordable cuts that transformed into something magnificent through patience and skill. Women learned this dish from their mothers in Georgia and Alabama, carrying recipes in memory rather than on paper. Children fought over the marrow, scooping it out with bread corners eagerly. This wasn't just Sunday dinner, but a bridge between Southern roots and Northern dreams and aspirations. Smothered chicken with rice and gravy defined Sunday tables when families wanted something special without expensive beef roasts taking up the budget. Whole chickens were cut into pieces, seasoned with salt, pepper, and paprika, then dredged in flour and fried golden brown until perfectly crisp. The chicken was then smothered in gravy made from pan drippings, onions, and broth, covered tightly, and cooked until meat nearly fell from the bone. The gravy turned silky brown, carrying flavor from seasoned flour and rendered chicken fat in every spoonful. Rice was prepared separately, each grain ready to catch every drop of precious gravy. Grandmothers judged younger cooks by their gravy consistency and ability to achieve that perfect golden crust before smothering began. This dish taught patience because rushing ruined everything about it. Families ate in reverent silence, broken only by requests for more gravy, more rice, and everything that made Sundays feel like salvation. Hoppin' John with ham hock carried spiritual significance beyond its humble ingredients of black-eyed peas, rice, and smoked pork that filled Harlem kitchens. Every Sunday serving connected families to enslaved ancestors who first combined African legumes with Carolina rice on plantations centuries earlier. The ham hock simmered for hours before the peas were added, its smoky fat transforming dried beans into something approaching velvet. Rice was cooked separately, then folded gently into peas to prevent mushiness and keep grains distinct. Onions, garlic, and bay leaves provided depth, while vinegar brightened flavors at the end. This dish appeared especially on New Year's Day for luck, but Harlem families served it year-round as affordable protein that stretched. The peas symbolized coins, and the greens served alongside represented money, promising prosperity for all. Children learned to cook this young because it required attention but forgave mistakes. Hoppin' John transformed poverty ingredients into cultural celebration. Neck bones and potatoes simmered on back burners throughout Sunday mornings, where economy and flavor found perfect balance in Harlem kitchens. Pork neck bones were browned first to develop fond, then slow-cooked with water, onions, garlic, and seasonings until meat became tender enough to slip from the bone easily. Potatoes were added during the last hour, cut into chunks that absorbed the porky, slightly gelatinous broth until they tasted like concentrated comfort food. Families bought neck bones cheaply from butchers who sold them as scraps, not realizing they were handing over flavorful cuts with incredible depth. Mothers stretched these bones across multiple meals, serving meat and potatoes Sunday, with leftover broth becoming Monday soup for the family. Children learned to pick every shred from the small bones, wasting nothing at all. This wasn't fancy food, but honest, filling fare that carried the wisdom of generations, who knew careful cooking transformed the cheapest ingredients into something families genuinely craved. Fried whiting with hot sauce and white bread was Friday supper that stretched into Sunday lunch when the catch was plentiful and the oil was hot. Small whiting fish were gutted, scaled, and dredged whole in seasoned cornmeal before hitting oil hot enough to make the coating crackle immediately upon contact. The fish fried until golden brown, flesh turning flaky white inside, while cornmeal became impossibly crispy outside with every piece. Hot sauce was shaken liberally over each piece, its vinegar cutting through richness while adding heat that woke up the palate. Soft white bread served as plate and utensil, soaking up juices that dripped from each bite. In Harlem, fish fries became social events where neighbors gathered on stoops and in apartments, sharing news and food equally. The smell of frying fish announced celebration up and down the block to everyone. Children learned to eat around bones with precision, extracting every flake. Sweet potato pone carried dessert traditions from plantation kitchens into Harlem apartments where Sunday dinners demanded something sweet to finish the meal properly. Grated raw sweet potatoes were mixed with molasses, butter, eggs, and warming spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger until batter became thick and fragrant. The mixture was poured into heavy dishes and cooked slowly until the top caramelized into a dark, candy-like crust while the interior stayed moist and dense throughout. This wasn't fluffy sweet potato pie, but something more ancient and substantial, connected directly to African cooking traditions that persisted through generations. Families served pone warm with cream or cold the next morning as breakfast that satisfied deeply. The dish required no expensive ingredients, just patience and a hot oven kept at the right temperature. Children scraped bowls clean, fighting over caramelized edges that had gone slightly crispy against the pan. Sweet potato pone represented survival transformed into celebration. Chitlins with vinegar and onions appeared on special Sunday tables where families celebrated tradition regardless of how neighbors reacted to the distinctive aroma. Pig intestines were cleaned meticulously over hours, boiled repeatedly with vinegar to remove impurity before being simmered with onions, bay leaves, and crushed red pepper until tender. The smell announced itself boldly through hallways and streets. For families who understood, chitlins represented ultimate waste-nothing cooking, transforming what others discarded into something deeply flavorful. The texture was chewy and slightly gelatinous, requiring thorough cooking but rewarding patience. Hot sauce and additional vinegar were passed at the table for personal adjustment. This wasn't everyday food, but holiday and Sunday fare reserved for gatherings where everyone understood cultural significance. Eating chitlins in Harlem connected families to Southern roots and ancestors who first made this dish. Red rice with sausage brought low-country goula traditions to Harlem Sunday tables where families recreated coastal Carolina flavors in apartment kitchens. The dish started with rendered sausage fat, then onions, peppers, and celery were sautéed before crushed tomatoes were added and cooked down. Rice was added directly to this base and cooked until each grain absorbed color and flavor, turning everything a deep, beautiful red. Smoked sausage coins were folded in at the end, adding pockets of savory richness. The dish carried complex flavors from simple ingredients, proving technique mattered more than expensive components. Gullah families who migrated north brought this recipe as cultural treasure, teaching it to children who had never seen the Sea Islands. The rice had to be cooked precisely, neither mushy nor undercooked. Red rice appeared at Sunday dinners and celebrations throughout Harlem, its distinctive color making it instantly recognizable. Pig feet and greens combined two Sunday essentials into one dish that fed families affordably while delivering nutrition and deep satisfaction. The feet were cleaned thoroughly, then simmered for hours until cartilage broke down and skin turned gelatinous and soft. Greens, usually collards or turnip greens, were added to the same pot, cooking in the rich fatty broth until tender and infused with porky flavor. The combination was served in deep bowls with cooking liquid called Potlikker, prized as much as solid ingredients. Vinegar and hot sauce were essential accompaniments, cutting through richness and brightening each bite. Children learned to eat around small bones and cartilage, extracting every edible bit with practiced precision. This dish represented African American cooking philosophy at its purest, using every part of the animal while creating something genuinely delicious. The feet cost almost nothing, yet delivered incredible flavor. Cracklin bread brought satisfying crunch of rendered pork fat into cornbread that elevated simple bread for Harlem families who remembered Southern traditions. Pork skin was rendered slowly until it became crispy cracklins, those golden bits of fat and skin that shattered between teeth. These cracklins were folded into cornbread batter made from stone-ground cornmeal and buttermilk. The bread baked in preheated cast iron, its bottom developing the crusty layer that separated good cornbread from great. Each bite delivered corn sweetness, interrupted by pockets of salty, crunchy pork, releasing fat when bitten. This bread accompanied every Sunday meal, used to soak up potlikker, gravy, and bean juice alike. Cracklin bread represented complete utilization of the hog that defined African American cooking. Families passed this recipe through generations without writing it down, each cook adjusting by feel. Best eaten hot when cracklins still maintained crunch. Molasses gingerbread appeared on Harlem Sunday tables as an affordable dessert that carried flavors of the rural South into urban apartments. The dense, dark cake was made with blackstrap molasses that provided sweetness without expensive sugar, combined with ginger, cinnamon, cloves, and allspice for warming complexity. The batter was thick and fragrant, baked in cast iron until the edges caramelized and the center stayed moist for days. Families served it warm with hard sauce or cold with buttermilk for breakfast Monday morning. The cake's deep color came from molasses rather than chocolate, making it accessible when cocoa was out of reach. Children loved its spicy sweetness and chewy texture. This wasn't delicate bakery cake, but substantial fare meant to fuel working bodies. Molasses gingerbread represented the ingenuity of cooks who created celebration from pantry staples, proving that limitation bred creativity rather than deprivation. Smothered cabbage with bacon drippings transformed humble vegetables into something families actually craved on Sunday tables throughout Harlem apartments and brownstones. A whole head of cabbage was cored and cut into thick wedges, then browned in rendered bacon fat until the edges caramelized and turned slightly sweet with concentrated flavor. Onions were added along with a splash of water. Then the pot was covered tightly and allowed to steam until the cabbage became silky tender throughout every layer. The bacon drippings provided richness that made the vegetables taste almost meaty, while the natural sugars in the cabbage intensified through the slow cooking process. This dish cost nearly nothing since cabbage was cheap year-round and bacon fat was saved from every breakfast without exception. It appeared alongside every Sunday meat as an essential part of the meal that nobody would dare skip. Peach cobbler in cast iron was Summer Sunday's gift to Harlem families who stretched seasonal fruit into generous dessert that fed everyone at the table. Fresh peaches were sliced and tossed with sugar and cinnamon, then poured over batter made from flour, sugar, milk, and melted butter in a preheated skillet. The cobbler baked until the batter rose around the fruit, turning golden brown on top while staying soft underneath. Juices from the peaches bubbled up through the crust, creating pockets of caramelized fruit syrup that pooled at the edges invitingly. Families served it warm with cold cream poured over, the hot and cold temperatures creating perfect contrast in every spoonful. During peach season, cobblers appeared weekly, made in quantities large enough that leftovers survived until Tuesday breakfast. The cast iron gave the bottom crust an almost fried crispness that regular baking dishes could never match. Okra fritters with corn silk were the kind of kitchen magic that only came from necessity and imagination. In the long summer months, when the fields were full and money was not, people used every part of what they harvested. The corn silk that clung to the ears was not thrown away, but saved and shredded, added into batter alongside chopped okra, flour, and a splash of milk or water. When dropped into hot oil, the fritters puffed and crackled, their edges turning golden and crisp. The smell was something you could follow from down the road. Warm, nutty, and sweet with that faint scent of corn. Each bite was crunchy on the outside and tender in the middle, with little strings of corn silk that gave it texture and charm. They were served with syrup or vinegar, depending on what the family had, eaten right out of the pan when patience ran out. Okra fritters with corn silk were food born from care and cleverness, proof that waste had no place in a humble kitchen. Every family had its own version, passed quietly between generations, carrying the taste of late afternoons, hard work, and simple joy. They were poverty's poetry, fried into something worth remembering. Buttermilk cornbread was the foundation that no Sunday dinner could exist without in Harlem households that carried Southern traditions north with their migrating families. Stone-ground cornmeal was mixed with tangy buttermilk, a little flour, baking powder, salt, and sometimes a touch of sugar depending on family preference and regional heritage. The batter was poured into cast iron preheated with bacon drippings or lard, creating immediate sizzle that promised proper crust. The bread baked until the top turned golden and the edges pulled away from the pan slightly. Proper cornbread had a crusty bottom and crumbly interior that soaked up potlikker, gravy, and bean juice without dissolving into mush. Families judged each other's cooking by cornbread quality, arguing endlessly whether sugar belonged at all. Children crumbled cornbread into buttermilk for snacks. This bread connected every meal to ancestral tables. Kidney stew was organ meat cooking at its richest, made by slowly braising pork or beef kidneys until tender and flavorful. Black mothers soaked the kidneys in milk or vinegar to remove any strong flavors, then sliced them and cooked them slowly with onions and gravy. The resulting stew was dark, savory, and intensely meaty, providing iron and protein that growing families needed. The kidneys had a unique texture, tender but slightly firm, and a flavor that was rich and mineral. Served over rice or with bread, kidney stew was filling and economical. In the 1920s, organ meats were common because they cost less than muscle meat but provided equal nutrition. Mothers knew that kidneys, properly prepared, were delicious rather than desperate food. The soaking process removed any unpleasant flavors, and slow cooking made them tender. Children who grew up eating kidney stew didn't find it strange. It was simply dinner. The dish represented nose-to-tail eating before it became a culinary trend. Kidney stew has largely disappeared as organ meats fell out of favor, but it once provided essential nourishment to Black families. Stewed tomatoes with sugar and bread was a side dish that confused outsiders but comforted families who grew up eating it every Sunday at their family tables. Canned tomatoes were heated with butter, sugar, and a pinch of salt until they became thick and almost jammy in consistency. Day-old bread was torn into chunks and stirred into the pot, where it absorbed the sweet, savory tomato liquid until it became soft and almost custard-like in texture. The dish walked a line between vegetable and dessert, its sweetness balanced by tomato acidity in perfect harmony. Families from Virginia and the Carolinas especially treasured this recipe, passing it down through generations who never questioned its rightful place on the table. Children often preferred this to other vegetables because of its sweetness. The dish represented how migration carried specific regional preferences north to new kitchens. Blackberry cobbler without sugar proved that fruit's natural sweetness could create desserts when refined sugar wasn't available. Wild blackberries grew abundantly along fence lines and in abandoned fields, free for anyone willing to brave thorns and summer heat to pick them. Black families sent children out with buckets, returning with purple-stained hands and enough berries to make cobblers that lasted days. The berries were cooked down until their juices concentrated, natural sugars intensifying without any additions. Simple biscuit dough made from flour, lard, and buttermilk was dropped over the bubbling fruit, then baked until golden. The result was tart and intense, less sweet than modern desserts, but deeply satisfying in ways sugar-laden versions never achieve. These cobblers appeared at church socials and family gatherings, proof that celebration didn't require money. Women competed quietly over whose cobbler turned out best, pride coming from skill rather than expensive ingredients. The practice of picking wild berries taught children about seasons, patience, and finding abundance in nature with steadfast pride. Black-eyed pea fritters connected Harlem tables directly to West African cooking traditions that survived the Middle Passage and persisted through centuries of adaptation and evolution. Dried black-eyed peas were soaked overnight, skinned by hand, and ground into smooth paste, then seasoned with salt, onions, and hot pepper, before being shaped and deep-fried until golden brown and crispy. The fritters puffed up in hot oil, their exteriors becoming impossibly crispy, while insides stayed creamy and tender throughout. These were street food in Lagos and Accra, but in Harlem they became Sunday appetizers passed around before the main meal arrived at the table. The technique required practice since the paste needed proper consistency and the oil needed exact temperature to achieve perfection. Children grabbed these hot from the draining paper, burning fingers but unable to wait for cooling. This dish represented unbroken culinary connection across oceans and centuries. Hoghead cheese, or souse meat, was not fancy food, but it had deep roots in tradition and respect for what you had. Made from the head of the pig, boiled, seasoned, and set in its own broth, it was a dish born from necessity and pride. It was eaten cold, sliced thin, and often shared at the table with crackers and conversation. What others might have thrown away became something flavorful and lasting in the right hands. It spoke of times when wasting food was unthinkable, when every part of the animal was used to honor the work that went into raising it. The smell of it cooking filled the whole house, sharp and strong, but it was the kind of smell that meant good things were coming. When cooled and sliced, it glistened in the light like proof of survival itself. Each piece held a story of long days, careful hands, and families who knew that resourcefulness was its own kind of wealth. Souse meat wasn't about glamour, it was about gratitude. Even if you didn't grow up eating it, the story it told was universal. Make do, make it good, and never take a meal for granted. Candied yams with marshmallows appeared on Harlem holiday tables where families wanted something special that children would actually eat without complaint or any negotiation at all. Sweet potatoes were parboiled until just tender, sliced thick, and layered in baking dishes with brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, and vanilla until the syrup became thick and gloriously glossy from caramelization. Marshmallows were added in the final minutes of baking, browning under the broiler until they turned golden and slightly charred at the peaks beautifully. The dish was impossibly sweet, almost dessert, but served alongside savory dishes in the way Southern tradition always demanded it be. Families argued whether marshmallows were authentic or modern innovation, but children didn't care about such debates at all. The combination of caramelized sweet potato, melted butter, and toasted marshmallow created flavors that made vegetables acceptable to even the pickiest young eaters at the table. Fried green tomatoes were a porch-side favorite, a snack for hot days and easy laughter. Slices of firm green tomatoes were dipped in cornmeal, fried golden in a skillet, and sprinkled with salt while still sizzling. The result was crisp on the outside, soft inside, and just tart enough to make your mouth water. You could eat them standing up, still hot from the pan, or stack them high beside a plate of beans and rice. They were the kind of treat you didn't plan, you just made them when the garden gave too many tomatoes. The pop of oil, the hum of conversation, and the smell of cornmeal frying turned an ordinary afternoon into something special. Kids waited by the stove, stealing pieces when the cook wasn't looking, their fingers burned but happy. Fried green tomatoes weren't just about taste, they were about time, patience, and community. Their taste was bold but humble, a reminder of summers that felt endless and simple pleasures that cost almost nothing. Fried green tomatoes were living proof that good things come to those who cook from the heart. Fried corn off the cob brought late summer abundance to Sunday tables where fresh vegetables were treated with reverence and careful technique by knowing cooks. Corn kernels were cut from the cob with sharp knives, then the cob was scraped thoroughly to release the milky starch that would thicken the dish naturally without any flour. The kernels were fried slowly in butter with a little water, covered, and allowed to steam until tender while the natural starches created creamy consistency that coated every kernel. Salt, pepper, and sometimes a touch of sugar enhanced the corn's sweetness without masking its fresh flavor. This wasn't creamed corn from cans, but fresh corn transformed through simple technique and patient attention to detail. Families made this only when corn was in season, making it seasonal celebration worth anticipating each year. The dish taught children that fresh vegetables needed minimal intervention to shine their brightest on any Sunday table. Okra soup stretched vegetables into filling meals that provided nutrition and comfort during impossible economic times. Fresh okra from summer gardens or dried okra stored from previous harvests went into pots with tomatoes, onions, and whatever else the garden provided. The okra released natural thickeners as it cooked, creating viscous soup that coated the spoon and filled empty stomachs. Black cooks added rice to make the soup even more substantial, transforming a few vegetables into meals for entire families. The dish carried flavors that connected African American communities to West African ancestors who had cooked similar soups for centuries. In rural Louisiana and South Carolina, okra soup appeared regularly because okra grew prolifically in southern heat. The slime that some people found off-putting became crucial for thickening without expensive starches or cream. Families ate this soup with cornbread, using the bread to soak up every drop of precious broth. Children grew up loving okra soup's unique texture, finding comfort in its warmth and fullness despite systematic oppression. Liver pudding on toast was Sunday morning protein in Harlem households where waste-nothing cooking extended to organ meats that others avoided entirely without consideration. Pork liver was ground with seasonings, cornmeal, and spices, then formed into loaves that could be sliced and fried as needed throughout the week. The slices sizzled in hot skillets until the exterior crisped, while the interior stayed soft and almost spreadable on the toast. Served on toasted bread with hot sauce and raw onions, it provided iron-rich protein that fueled working bodies through long days of labor. The taste was distinctly livery, but mellowed by the cornmeal and spices that balanced its natural intensity beautifully. Children either loved or hated liver pudding with no middle ground possible. Families who ate it considered it essential sustenance, while others couldn't understand the appeal. This dish represented complete utilization of the hog. Lye hominy was ancient food, made by soaking dried corn in lye water until the kernels swelled and their hulls loosened. Black mothers learned this process from indigenous peoples and African traditions, creating food that was more nutritious than regular corn. The process began with making lye from wood ashes, then soaking field corn for days until the kernels transformed into pale, ghostly white hominy. After rinsing away all traces of lye, the hominy was boiled until tender. The taste was earthy and slightly mineral, with a chewy texture that satisfied hunger like nothing else. In the 1920s, hominy appeared regularly on black tables because it turned cheap field corn into something substantial. Mothers fried hominy in bacon grease for breakfast, creating crispy cakes that children ate with molasses. They stewed it with meat for dinner. Lye hominy represented knowledge passed through generations, showing that food preparation was both science and art. The technique has mostly disappeared, replaced by canned hominy that lacks the texture of the hand-processed original. Succotash with lima beans and corn united two ingredients that Native Americans first combined and African American cooks adopted as their own over many generations. Fresh lima beans were simmered until tender, then combined with corn kernels cut fresh from the cob in a pot with butter and a splash of cream when available. The vegetables were cooked together until the starches released and created a naturally thick, creamy consistency without any flour or thickeners. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings needed since the vegetables provided enough flavor on their own merits without embellishment. Bacon was sometimes added for smokiness, but the dish worked perfectly without meat for meatless days. Succotash appeared on Sunday tables year-round, made with dried limas and canned corn in winter when fresh wasn't available. The combination provided complete plant protein. This dish represented cultural exchange that created uniquely American food. Boiled peanuts in the shell were a southern snack that traveled north with migrating families who couldn't imagine Sunday afternoons without them by their side. Green peanuts fresh from the ground were boiled for hours in heavily salted water until they became soft and almost creamy inside their shells. The texture was nothing like roasted peanuts, but instead soft and legume-like, closer to beans than nuts in every way. Families gathered around pots of boiled peanuts, cracking shells, and eating the warm, salty contents while sharing conversation and catching up on the week's events together. The preparation was simple, but the timing mattered because undercooked peanuts stayed hard, while overcooked ones turned mushy and unpleasant. Street vendors in the South sold them from steaming pots, but in Harlem, families made their own when green peanuts could be found at markets. Boiled peanuts represented informal Sunday gatherings and the kind of snacking that brought people together. Oxtail stew transformed the tail of cattle into fall-off-the-bone tender meat swimming in rich, gelatinous gravy that coated everything perfectly when served over white rice. The oxtails were browned first to develop deep flavor, then slowly braised with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and red wine or broth for hours until the meat became incredibly tender and rich. The bones released collagen and marrow, thickening the sauce naturally and creating richness that couldn't be achieved any other way with cheaper ingredients. This wasn't quick food, but patient food, requiring hours of low heat to transform tough connective tissue into silky texture worth waiting for. Families served this on special occasions despite the humble ingredient because the preparation demanded time and attention that showed love clearly. In the 1970s, oxtails were considered throwaway cuts that butchers sold cheaply, perfect for Black families who understood their potential for transformation into something special. The dish represented culinary alchemy, showing how time, technique, and patience could transform the least desirable cuts. Hominy pancakes were another clever way families stretched resources into filling meals. Hominy, boiled corn kernels treated with lye, was folded into simple flour batter and fried on a hot griddle until crisp on the edges. The result was a pancake that was hearty, chewy, and rich in flavor. Families leaned on this dish because hominy was inexpensive, filling, and often available in bulk. These pancakes were served plain or topped with syrup, molasses, or even just butter when sugar was scarce. Children enjoyed the slightly nutty texture, while adults appreciated that it carried them through long hours of work. Hominy pancakes were tied to heritage too, with roots reaching back to Native American food traditions that influenced Southern cooking. They were a reminder of resilience and cultural continuity, showing how simple staples could be reinvented to meet new needs. Hominy pancakes filled stomachs, but they also filled mornings with the comfort of tradition and the creativity of making do. Blackberry cobbler was the reunion favorite made from berries that came straight from backyards, fence lines, or summer fields where children stained their fingers purple, gathering enough fruit to fill a pot. The berries cooked down with sugar until they released their deep purple juices, filling the kitchen with a smell that drifted like warm, sweet air across the entire gathering. The crust was dropped in thick spoonfuls or spread across the top, depending on family tradition, and it baked into a golden blanket that cracked open to reveal bubbling fruit beneath. Each scoop held sweet tart berries wrapped in soft dough, and every bowl stained lips and spoons with the color of summer. Blackberry cobbler tasted like hot afternoon's laughter and the pride of bringing something homegrown to the reunion table. It was the dessert that vanished quickly because everyone wanted a taste of the season captured in a single dish. Ambrosia was the celestial dessert that appeared on Black Christmas tables in cut glass bowls, its layers of fresh fruit and coconut glistening like edible jewels. This wasn't the simplified version made with canned fruit cocktail. Proper ambrosia required cracking fresh coconuts to extract their sweet meat and milk. Grandmothers would pierce the coconut's eyes, drain the liquid, then crack the shell with hammers before prying out the white flesh to be grated by hand. Fresh oranges were peeled and sectioned, their membranes removed so only tender segments remained. Layers of coconut, orange, and sometimes pineapple were built in serving dishes, each level dusted with powdered sugar. The finished ambrosia was chilled overnight, allowing flavors to meld into something heavenly. Children gathered hoping to taste the coconut milk or sneak a cherry before dinner. The dish represented Christmas abundance, a time when families splurged on ingredients that transformed ordinary fruit into something magical. Pound cake trifles made from leftover cake were the clever reunion dessert trick grandmothers used to stretch what they had into something that looked brand new. When slices of pound cake began to dry out, she cut them into cubes, soaking them lightly with fruit juice pudding or sweetened cream to bring them back to life. Then she layered the cubes with fruit custard and whipped topping, building the dessert in glass bowls where each layer showed like colorful stripes. Peaches, strawberries, bananas, or canned fruit cocktail all worked beautifully, adding sweetness and color to the creamy layers. By the time the trifle was finished, no one could guess it had started with leftovers. It tasted soft, refreshing, and indulgent, especially after a heavy meal. Pound cake trifles proved that resourcefulness was part of the reunion tradition, turning yesterday's dessert into today's showstopper. Cornmeal batter cakes were one of the simplest meals that could appear on a Southern table, and they carried generations of tradition within them. Families would take cornmeal, water, and sometimes a pinch of salt, stir it into a thin batter, and fry it on a hot griddle until crisp at the edges. They were plain, but they filled stomachs and could be eaten with molasses, honey, or drippings if there was any to spare. For children heading to school or workers starting long days in the fields, these cakes offered quick energy without costing much. Cornmeal was one of the most dependable ingredients because it was cheap, easy to store, and produced in abundance across the South. A few scoops stretched further than wheat flour, and it did not require yeast or fancy preparation. Cornmeal batter cakes might have been plain, but in households facing hunger, they meant survival and warmth. They were a food that held families steady when little else did. Turnip-top dumplings were humble food turned holy. You started with a pot of greens simmering low, their smoky scent winding through the house. Bits of flour dough were pinched and dropped into the bubbling pot, swelling as they cooked and soaking up every trace of pepper and salt. The broth grew thick and rich, tasting of the land and the love poured into it. People called it poor man's stew, but it filled the heart as much as the belly. Served steaming in old bowls, it felt like warmth made visible. Children dipped crusts of bread into it while adults closed their eyes and savored the peace it brought. The dumplings were soft and chewy, little pockets of memory, flavored by patience and time. It was a meal for winter nights, for families gathered close, for prayers whispered over steam. Turnip-top dumplings carried a lesson that still matters. Food is never about wealth, but about care. In every spoonful was the proof that small things, done with love, could feed a world. Fried chicken wings, before they became trendy and expensive, were the discarded parts of chickens that Black families transformed into crispy, flavorful snacks and satisfying meals. The wings were seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in flour, then fried until golden and crispy in hot oil or lard that made them absolutely delicious. The skin crisped perfectly while the small amount of meat stayed juicy, creating satisfying bites that disappeared quickly from plates at gatherings. These weren't considered premium food in the 1970s, when most people wanted breasts and thighs instead of bony wings nobody else wanted. That meant wings cost almost nothing per pound, sometimes given away free by butchers trying to clear inventory from coolers. Families made huge batches for weekend gatherings, serving them with hot sauce and white bread for perfect combinations. Fried chicken wings represented finding value in what others overlooked, transforming cheap cuts into genuinely delicious food that eventually became so popular they're now expensive. Charred sweet potato peel tea was the drink of those who refused to give up warmth even when comfort seemed gone. When sugar was low and coffee was nothing but memory, families gathered the peels of sweet potatoes, rinsed them, and laid them across open flames until the edges blackened and curled. The smell was deep and smoky, the scent of fire and sweetness twined together. Once roasted, the peels were steeped in boiling water, turning the liquid a soft amber brown with a flavor that felt older than the land itself. Some people added honey or molasses for richness, others drank it plain, savoring the faint caramel taste that soothed the heart. It was a quiet ritual, often shared at the end of long days, when words were few but peace was needed. The steam rose like a prayer, the kind that carried both sorrow and gratitude. Charred sweet potato peel tea was not about luxury or comfort. It was about memory, care, and the belief that warmth could always be found again. It was love brewed slowly, proof that even ashes could hold sweetness. Red rice with sausage brought Gullah traditions into urban Black kitchens, creating one-pot meals that combined African cooking techniques with American ingredients in uniquely flavorful and satisfying ways. Long grain rice was cooked with smoked sausage, tomatoes, onions, peppers, and spices until the rice absorbed all the liquid and turned deep red throughout. The dish was savory, slightly spicy, and deeply satisfying, with each grain of rice coated in tomato richness and sausage fat for maximum flavor. This wasn't just food, but cultural heritage, connecting coastal African Americans to West African jollof rice through centuries of adaptation and survival across oceans. Families served this at celebrations, church dinners, and regular weeknight meals when rice and sausage were all the budget allowed for feeding everyone. In the 1970s, rice was among the cheapest starches available, and smoked sausage provided maximum flavor from minimal meat for economical cooking. Red rice with sausage represented cultural continuity and African heritage, surviving through food traditions that connected past to present. Watermelon rind pickles were the jewel-toned preserves that Black grandmothers made each summer and saved for Christmas morning's breakfast spread. The thick white rind of watermelons, usually discarded, was carefully trimmed of its green skin and pink flesh, then soaked overnight in lime water to ensure crispness. The prepared rinds were simmered in spiced syrup, heavy with cinnamon, cloves, and allspice, until they turned translucent and took on the amber color of the cooking liquid. Packed into mason jars, these pickles aged in pantries until the holidays, when they appeared alongside ham and biscuits. Their taste was unexpectedly delicious, sweet, tangy, and warmly spiced with a texture that snapped between the teeth. The pickles represented the waste-nothing philosophy that had sustained Black families through hard times, transforming what others threw away into something worth savoring. Few modern cooks invest the time these preserves required. Homemade fudge squares were the dense, chocolatey treats that always appeared in foil-lined dishes tucked between cakes and pies on the reunion table. She cooked sugar butter, cocoa, and milk on the stove, stirring constantly until the mixture bubbled thick and glossy. After removing it from the heat, she added vanilla and sometimes chopped nuts before beating it by hand to achieve the perfect texture. Then she poured the mixture into a pan lined with foil, smoothing the top before letting it cool and firm. Once set, she cut the fudge into neat squares, each one rich, creamy, and deeply satisfying. Children grabbed pieces with sticky fingers, and adults tucked extra squares into napkins for the ride home. Homemade fudge tasted like celebration and togetherness, dense with flavor and memory. Hominy crackle porridge was the kind of breakfast that came from patience, not plenty. When there was no bacon, no biscuits, and not much else in the pantry, leftover hominy saved the day. It was stirred into a pot with water or milk, sweetened with molasses, and spiced with nutmeg or cinnamon if you had it. The sound of the spoon scraping against the pot made a rhythm that felt almost like music, slow and steady like morning itself. When the porridge bubbled, it released a scent both earthy and rich, a blend of smoke, sugar, and warmth. Children would sit waiting with chipped bowls in their hands, ready for the first ladle. It was thick and creamy, sometimes with a thin golden crust if it sat long enough. Hominy crackle porridge filled bellies and lifted moods, turning scraps into something special. It reminded families that sweetness did not depend on sugar alone, but on love and endurance. Every spoonful was a story of thrift and tenderness, made from what was left and shared without complaint. When the bowl was empty, people still felt full, not just from the food, but from the comfort it brought to a hard world made softer by care. Pig ears, boiled then fried, transformed another discarded cut into crispy, gelatinous treats that appeared at gatherings and celebrations throughout Black communities nationwide during warm months. The ears were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then sliced into strips, breaded, and deep-fried until golden and crispy on the outside with satisfying crunch. The texture was unique, with crispy breading giving way to tender cartilage that had a satisfying chew unlike any other food available anywhere. These weren't everyday food, but special treats that showed up at fish fries, family reunions, and summer cookouts where people gathered to celebrate. The ears provided collagen and minerals while costing almost nothing per pound, since most butchers were happy to sell what they couldn't move otherwise to anyone. In the 1970s, pig ears represented nose-to-tail eating decades before it became fashionable in upscale restaurants charging premium prices. The preparation required skill and patience, with experienced cooks knowing exactly how long to boil and at what temperature to fry perfectly. Okra fritters with corn silk were the kind of kitchen magic that only came from necessity and imagination. In the long summer months, when the fields were full and money was not, people used every part of what they harvested. The corn silk that clung to the ears was not thrown away, but saved and shredded, added into batter alongside chopped okra, flour, and a splash of milk or water. When dropped into hot oil, the fritters puffed and crackled, their edges turning golden and crisp. The smell was something you could follow from down the road. Warm, nutty, and sweet with that faint scent of corn. Each bite was crunchy on the outside and tender in the middle, with little strings of corn silk that gave it texture and charm. They were served with syrup or vinegar, depending on what the family had, eaten right out of the pan when patience ran out. Okra fritters with corn silk were food born from care and cleverness, proof that waste had no place in a humble kitchen. Every family had its own version, passed quietly between generations, carrying the taste of late afternoons, hard work, and simple joy. They were poverty's poetry, fried into something worth remembering. Which lost soul food recipe would you bring back to your Sunday table? Drop your favorite memories in the comments below, hit like if this brought back warm memories of family and tradition, and subscribe for more forgotten flavors from our heritage.